Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'du fa'uzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum viewers and listeners. We have now reached study 27 of the Ramadan Daily Quran studies for the year 2020. And as you all well know by now, I'm Zahid Aziz, who's delivering these on behalf of the MD Anjuman Islam Lahore, UK. And we're continuing with this series on the theory of abrogation. There is this study and then the next one, which then will conclude this topic. So this is sixth in the series on the doctrine of abrogation. I mentioned in the last study this English translation of the Quran officially published by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, entitled the Noble Quran. Another verse which is declared in it as abrogated is one which we've discussed previously in these studies. Inna lazina amanu wal lazina hadu wal nasara was sabeina man amana billahi wal yawmil akhir wa amala salihan falahum ajruhum inda rabbihim wala khawfun alaihim wala hum yahzanun. In other words, surely those who believe, and those who are Jews and the Christians and the Sabians, whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does good, they have their reward with their Lord, and there is no fear for them, nor shall they grieve. Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2 verse 62. In their translation, they have added a footnote under this verse to say that this verse, and there is another verse in chapter 5, 569, they have added a footnote to say that this verse and the similar verse 569 have been abrogated by verse 85 of chapter 3, 385. And what that verse 385 says is, and I quote it in translation, "And whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted from him, and in the hereafter he will be one of the losers." Now, I've mentioned that in chapter 5, verse 69 is quite similar to verse 62 of chapter 2, the one mentioning Jews and Christians and Sabians. The only difference from 262 and 569 is that the order of the Christians and the Sabians is changed round, which is inconsequential. And also the words "they have their reward with their Lord" are absent, but the words "there is no fear for them, nor shall they grieve" are still there. So it is in effect saying exactly the same thing as verse 62 of chapter 2. If you look up sources, and there are many, on the time of revelation of various chapters of the Quran, we find that chapter 5, containing that verse 69, was revealed after chapter 3, perhaps up to 4 years after it. So how can one say that chapter 5 verse 69 was abrogated by chapter 3 verse 85 when chapter 5 was actually revealed up to 4 years after chapter 3? In the printed versions of these studies, I've given a link where you can look up the traditional order of revelation of chapters of the Quran, and you can see that what I've said is indeed correct. But additionally, let us quote from the English version of Maulana Sayyid Abul Ala Maududi's famous translation of the Quran, Tafhimul Quran. Tafhimul Quran is in Urdu, but an English translation of that whole work was also produced, and I'm referring to that. In the introduction to chapter 3, Maududi says that its initial verses 1 to 32 were revealed soon after the Battle of Badr, and that verses 64 to 120 also appear to have been revealed immediately after the Battle of Badr. In other words, in 2 AH. Now, the group of verses in chapter 3, 64 to 120, of course, includes 85, the one which is said to have abrogated those previous verses. So that was revealed in around the second year of the Hijrah. And in the same book by Maulana Maududi, the same tafsir, in the introduction to chapter 5, he says, the contents of the surah indicate, and the tradition support it, that it was revealed at the end of the 6th year of the Hijrah or the beginning of the 7th. And moreover, he adds, this surah, chapter 5, in other words, was revealed to suit the requirements of the changed conditions which were now different from those prevailing at the time of the revelation of chapters 3 and 4. So chapter 5 was clearly, everyone admits, revealed 4, maybe even possibly 5 years after chapter 3. And as we see, chapter 5, verse 69 is a repeat of that verse 62 of chapter 2. It is therefore simply impossible, factually and historically, that verse 85 of chapter 3 could have abrogated verse 69 of chapter 5. On the contrary, 569 actually came to verify the earlier 262, long after 385 had been revealed. So having now settled conclusively that neither 262 nor 569 are abrogated by 385, we explain why on the face of it, this 385 seems to say the opposite of those other two. In other words, why does this say that Islam is the only religion acceptable from anyone in the hereafter, while the other two clearly include Jews and Christians as among those who in the hereafter shall have no fear nor shall they grieve? I think several answers could be given to this, but one answer is this. Those two other verses, supposedly abrogated, what they are telling us is that the core and fundamentals of the religion of the Jews and Christians, that core and fundamentals are whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does good. Those two verses are telling us that this does lead to salvation. These are also the core and fundamentals of the religion brought by the Holy Prophet Muhammad. Now what 385 is calling as seeking a religion other than Islam which will not be accepted in the hereafter, what that is referring to are the self-added doctrines of the Jews and the Christians, which they have made as more important and basic than the fundamentals. In case of the Jews, these added doctrines were their belief that revelation from God came only to the Israelites, and therefore a true prophet could only arise among the Israelites. But despite believing that, they even rejected Jesus, who did come among the Israelites. But anyhow, upon this basis, they rejected the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he has risen among the Israelites. In case of Christians, their added doctrine was their belief that Jesus was uniquely the Son of God in a manner not attained by any other prophet, and that belief in Jesus and Jesus alone brought salvation. So when 385 says whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted, it is talking about these added doctrines by the Jews and the Christians. Now all you have to do is to read the verse before 385. In other words, 384. And that in translation runs as follows. Say, in other words, telling Muslims to say to the world, to Jews and Christians, we believe in Allah and in what is revealed to us and in what was revealed to Abraham and Ismail and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and in what was given to Moses and Jesus and to the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them. We make no distinction between any of them. And to him we submit. And this 384 is actually just a repeat of 2136. In other words, verse 136 of chapter 2. This is just an almost exact repeat of it. And this in verse 84 of chapter 3 explains what is meant by Islam, which is mentioned in the next verse. This verse tells us, verse 84, that Islam is to believe in God and in the sending of revelation to all his prophets and making no distinction between the prophets and submitting to God. And as I already mentioned, the Jewish and Christian religions do make a distinction between the prophets of God because of their self-added doctrines, which have been added over and above the core of their religion. It is belief in those additions which makes a person a loser in the hereafter. Now, a person who confines God's revelation just to his own nation on a tribal or racial basis, and in this life he treats other nations as being rejected by God, that is one person. Or you have a person who believes that his own sins have been forgiven merely because of his belief in the founder of his religion, but not sins of anyone else. Their sins can't be forgiven. These two types of people, and you will know what I mean by that, such persons will be losers in the hereafter because they will face a God who treats everyone equally and requires justice to be done by all, regardless of their nation or creed. That brings to an end study 27. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa rafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wal zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikun barrur raufur rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.